We are live. Okay, so just won't be long actually. This is Steve Gibbons from Bridges, and we'll be live in just a minute here. We made the connection. We're just waiting for a few people to come online, and we'll get started in just a few seconds. All right, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director of Bridges, and welcome to another episode of Bridges Conversations, where we have conversations with our friends and with Ignatian authors and prayer companions and spiritual directors about lots of things, but all things Ignatian, we say. So today we are being joined by two members of the Bridges community, Mary White, who's a prayer companion and a presenter within the Bridges and the Magis community, and Dee Wiecher, who is a more recent participant in our retreat. And so yeah, today, in kind of in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to be talking a little more specifically about the role of women in the development of the spiritual exercises, and a little bit about that relationship between Ignatius and the women of his life. So, so we're going to begin, as we always do, with just a little bit of introduction. So if you both could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family of origins, where you grew up, what that family was like, faith-wise, family-wise, and a little bit of your story of faith, how and where you came to faith, and maybe tie that all up with how you came to know about and to experience the spiritual exercises and Ignatian spirituality. So a lot in there, and you got 2 minutes, go. So no need to rush. But so let's start with Mary. Mary, fill us in on you and your journey.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. I am a cradle Catholic, originally from Connecticut. My family consisted of my parents and my older brother. The church was integral to our family. My first image of God was at our local parish, Holy Trinity, where an overarching painting of the Trinity spanned the ceiling above the altar, depicting a scowling God the Father, a crucified Son below him, and an expansive white dove adorning the foot of the cross. So that's my initial image. Like many of my contemporaries, I attended the parish elementary school, followed by an all-girls Catholic high school, staffed by a women's religious order, the Apostles of the Sacred Heart. After a brief college stint, I entered that community and subsequently spent many years, including in ministry, including several here in St. Louis. Although I am no longer a member of the community, I am certainly grateful for the many opportunities it provided me.
How did you come into contact with Ignatian spirituality in the course of all that?
Well, actually, obviously, as being a religious, we had annual retreats. And my first directed retreat in the Ignatian tradition was in 1976. And in the early 90s, Father John Futrell presented a 2-day workshop to our community on Ignatian spirituality and discernment. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to make several directed retreats in the Ignatian tradition and received the exercises in a 30-day retreat in the mid-90s. And that was a pivotal experience in my life.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Dee, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm Dee Wiecher. I'm originally from Indiana. I was born and raised in southern Indiana. I went to our local Methodist church in Milltown when I was 6 weeks old. um, just as soon as my mother felt that she could leave the house, truthfully. Uh, I have two sisters. They happen to be twins. We have a lot of those in our family for some reason, but my sisters are twins. And then I am a Hoosier. I will admit that. Okay. I know that's important in Missouri that I admit to being a Hoosier. Um, our family was deeply involved in church. We moved to Indianapolis at one point. I was in what we called MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship. I also attended a Methodist college on a Methodist scholarship. Now, after I graduated, I moved to St. Louis, and here I met my future husband. When we were in our meetings with the pastor, my Methodist pastor back in Indiana, who was going to marry us, he realized that my future husband was involved in his church, and that's where I had met him at the invitation of a friend. And he suggested that I join his church rather than upset the apple cart, so to speak. That was very magnanimous of him. So I did. I joined the church. Kind of deep down inside, I was a Methodist, I'm to admit. I was there for 45 years. And then just a little over 10 years ago, I returned to my Methodist faith when I joined the gathering. Now, do you want me to talk about how I came into the spiritual exercises?
Yeah, just talk, because we
Okay.
we talk
Well,
a little bit, because Bridges has a role in that. So there you go.
Yes, they do, because my first introduction to Ignatian spirituality was when Sabre Engelbrecht at the gathering led a small group of us through the exercises using the 19th notation and the work of Larry Warner. It's kind of designed for Protestants going through the spiritual exercises. And she recommended that Bridges would be a good next step for me. So that following year, I joined Bridges, and Vicki Harpring was my prayer companion. So that's and now I've been in Magis now for 3 years, I think 3 years. So
thank you. Magis, for those of you joining in who are seeing this, is kind of a follow-up program that Bridges offers to the 19th Annotation Retreat, where we all of us for many years continue to engage in the spirituality of St. Ignatius. So let's get to the topic of today, which is kind of all about women and the spiritual exercises, women and St. Ignatius. There's a book that Mary is using this year in a Magis group. In a Magis group called "Why Do You Trouble This Woman? Women and the Spiritual Exercises." And reading that book in preparation for our conversation over the last couple of weeks, I'm struck by this notion that there were many women who saved Ignatius, nurtured him, gave him financial support, and were key to the development of the spiritual exercises. So, Mary, why don't we go to you first? Why don't you tell us a little bit about this aspect of the development of Ignatius and his thought?
Right. As you say, women were key to Ignatius' survival in his early years, especially beginning in Manresa. For those of you who may not realize, when Ignatius went to Manresa, he was coming from his conversion experience went to Manresa, lived in a cave for almost a year, and for the first 4 months really let himself go to seed. He let his hair grow, his nails grow, he was unkempt, and he literally almost had a mental breakdown to the point of suicidal ideation. And it was the women who actually sustained him, who fed him, and who nurtured him. And without the women, I doubt we would be talking about Ignatius today.
I ask both of you maybe this question, you can answer it in your own way, but in these early women who are a part of the story of Ignatius, do you have a favorite? Someone who really kind of grabs your imagination? Dee?
Yes, I do. The women of Manresa were very pivotal for Ignatius, but there is one, though, there's a woman that I believe that Ignatius would say was the most pivotal woman in his spiritual development, and that was his brother-in-law, his brother's wife, and her name was Magdalena, which is just a wonderful name for the woman that nurtured him so well. She attended to him both physically and spiritually after he had been injured in the Battle of Pamplona. So she was very pivotal in his life. He was lonely, he was upset, he was isolated, and he was in a lot of pain, physical pain. So, but he asked for books to read. He wanted to read romance and chivalry books. And Magdalena brought him 2 books. One of them was a book on the life of Christ, and the other one on the lives of the saints. Not exactly what he was asking for, but she did bring them to him. And not only did she do that, she ministered to him physically and spiritually, and she engaged him about what he was reading in those books, which I think was also an important step along the way. So he made a dramatic change in his life spiritually at that point. Now, he went on to Manresa to develop this, but I think that was his very pivotal time in his life.
Yeah, thank God for the wisdom of Magdalena of giving him those 2 books, The Lives of the Saints and The Life of Christ. Mary, how about you? You got a favorite? Or?
Yeah, actually, my favorite or significant woman occurs later on in Ignatius' life after he leaves Manresa and begins to plant the seeds of his early congregation. And the woman of whom I speak was a dynamic woman of Catalan nobility. She was very strong. She was very dynamic. Her name was Isabel Roser. She was a great benefactor of Ignatius, both in Barcelona, in Paris, and in Venice. And she had a close relationship with Ignatius. After she was widowed in 1541, she and 2 other women petitioned Ignatius to make vows as religious in the society. And so that occurred at the end of 1546. Actually, on Christmas Day, they pronounced vows. But within 4 months, Ignatius petitioned the Pope to release them from the vows. Now, you can imagine for Isabel, here she's had a long-standing relationship with Ignatius. She wants to become a religious under his leadership. And he dissolves that. And so their relationship was fractured. and it remained fractured for a long time. But eventually they reconciled, and Isabel entered another religious community. So a very painful human experience.
Yeah. So there's some irony in this of the women's importance to the whole development of the spiritual exercises, and yet their absence from the order. Yeah.
Right. And one of the reasons that is given is for the lack of a comparable religious women's community of Jesuits, is the fact that Ignatius wanted the society to be free to move unhampered in order to meet essential demands. And remember that in the 1500s, any religious woman was going to be cloistered. So that was not going to go with the apostolic activity orientation.
Interesting. Let's move ahead to kind of more modern times. The spiritual exercises were, offered throughout the centuries, as I've been told, to men and to women, to lay people, to religious people. But it really wasn't until kind of later in the 20th century when there was more of a focus on lay people receiving the exercises, lay women receiving the exercises, and those same groups of people also learning to give the exercises to others, which is how Bridges came about really in the early part of that movement, thanks to some, really strong women like Joan Felling and Mary Mondello, who's still with us, and Sister Marian Cowan, who is a sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet, among others, who really brought the spiritual exercises and really helped begin Bridges in the 80s. Mary, could you talk a little bit about, there's a 1995 statement from the Jesuit congregation about increasing women's movement and doing all this. So could you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe we'll segue that into a conversation with both of you on kind of overcoming some of the male and militaristic dominated images and stereotypes and biases that were kind of inherent in the spiritual exercises 500 years ago. So that's a lot, I realize, but yeah, take that however you want.
Okay. Before I talk about the statement from the Jesuits, I want to just go back and point out the fact that in 1991, there was an English language bibliography that was published dealing with the spiritual exercises. And there were 750 texts that were listed. And of the 750, only 36 were authored or co-authored by women. One of those women was Sister Marian Cowan. She's listed in that bibliography. So at that time, the vast majority of works about the spiritual exercises were written by women or were written by Jesuits. But then in the 1980s, as more and more women were giving and receiving the spiritual exercises, even as that continued, there was very little articulation of women's experience making the spiritual exercises. But the Society of Jesus has given support to women making and giving the spiritual exercises. And there's an explicit statement from their 34th General Congregation in 1995 that affirms the policy of women's involvement in the spiritual exercises. And it reads as follows: religious and lay women have in recent years become expert in the giving of spiritual exercises. As retreat directors, especially of the exercises in daily life, They have enriched the Ignatian tradition and our own understanding of ourselves and of our ministry. Many women have helped to reshape our theological tradition in a way that has liberated both men and women. So, collaboration between the Jesuits and women in the ministry of the spiritual exercises has increasingly become a reality over the past 35 years, if you think of it. And 5 years ago, they established a commission to look at the roles and responsibilities of women in relation to the society itself. And St. Francis Xavier College Church has a woman who is the director of the work, while the canonical pastor is a Jesuit. So that's a good example.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about these kind of the male-dominated, military-dominated biases, images, stereotypes that we see in the exercises. And again, I think he was a man of his time, right? And that he was a man of court, and that's where he came from. But how do we make then the transition to reading his work, praying with his meditations, and making them something that we can all understand, and that maybe especially women can better embrace? Dee, you want to tackle part of that first, and then we'll come back to Mary? Or?
I'll give a start to it. First of all, I'm grateful for two women who helped me to help exercises. Sabra Engelbrecht, who used The Journey of Jesus, and the author of that book, Larry Warner, kind of softened that crusade language. It made it a little, in fact, I didn't realize how much of that language was in it until I went through the exercises with Bridges. Then when I was doing those, my prayer companion, Vicki Harpring, allowed me or encouraged me when I found the book, The Jesus Way by Karen Keene. And Karen Keene brought a woman's voice, I think, to it, encouraging more art, more personal art and finding art and that kind of thing. And she helped along that way. Now, some of the problems for us, I think, is the male dominant language in the Bible. And that
starts before Ignatius, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, it goes back further than Ignatius. Sorry about that. And so there are things that could be done or that you could do, and that would be leading a woman through that. And instead of concentrating on Zechariah there at John the Baptist's birth, move to Elizabeth and how she felt about it in the midst of that. And Elizabeth would be a great woman for women to understand that opportunity at that time. Another one would be one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It's about Simeon and Anna, two elderly people who met with the Holy Family when they went for Jesus's dedication at the temple. Now, there's a lot of people that will concentrate on Simeon, but I think if you look at Anna, you would have just a similar experience as for the males with Simeon. So it's finding that voice in the scriptures. Now, one final thing, and that is I have discovered several recent versions of the Bible that translate biblical words that are not really gender related. And they use more gender neutral language instead of something about man, saying people, using they, those kinds of words instead of him, And it makes a little difference. My favorite is the New Living Translation, but I would advise others to look for one that speaks to them. There are several out there.
Yeah, thank you. Mary, I'll allow you to piggyback onto that any way that you want, but let me just add an additional thought here that we talked about earlier, that we talk often about the spiritual exercises being, we tell people it's not a Bible study, it's not a prayer group. This is an encounter, with Jesus. And we talked a little earlier about, how do you think especially for women, how are these spiritual exercises perceived differently from women? And I think, again, as you so aptly say, a lot of this goes back to Jesus's own relationship with women and his interaction with them. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. If you start from Scripture, women have always had difficulty accessing Jesus. There were always male guardians, there were gatekeepers, there were bouncers. They always wanted to exclude women from accessing Jesus. And yet, when you look at the interactions of Jesus with the women of his time, he was always willing to defend them and protect them. He reacts to their accusers by rebuking their accusers. He protects the women from attackers, and he affirms their beauty and their love. Unfortunately, in Scripture, we have very few words from women. We have Mary, his mother, and we have a few others, but essentially women are silent in the Scripture. So in that sense, I think it becomes difficult for women to access them or access the depth of the Scriptures. Desire is the energy that unfolds the conversion dynamic of the exercises. But for women, their authentic desires may not be readily accessible. So literally, their desires may have to be excavated or adopted, or they may literally have to be excavated from imposed or adopted desires of the societal expectations of women's roles. And I just want to point out that the book that we use at Magis, Why Do You Trouble This Woman, is written by a religious nun from Nigeria. So she puts an African understanding into the spiritual exercises and really writes from the perspective of an African woman who lives in a society that is essentially male dominated. So that gives a different twist.
Yeah. Before we move on, I think we glossed over it before, but can you say a little bit about this book, The Spiritual Exercises Reclaimed? I know you said this is a very important book in the development of this.
Right. This book, Spiritual Exercises Reclaimed, was first published in 2001. It was published by three Catholic religious women, Dykman, Garvin, and Lieber. And this was the seminal work that began the exploration of the interaction of women and the spiritual exercises. The image that's in front of you is an image of the second edition, which was published in 2021. And if you look at the second name, Anne Marie Paulin Campbell, she is a woman from South Africa. She's the director of a spirituality institute. And her dissertation was basically on how the exercises impact women in terms of their images of God and their relationships. And it's probably the first time that there was a serious research project on actually women's reactions to the exercises.
Thank you. Aware of our time, we're coming up about a half hour, so I thought maybe we just end with maybe a couple questions, and I'll let either one of you take one. A lot of the experience of the spiritual exercises has to do with our imaginations, using our imaginations to place ourselves in the story, using our imaginations to find a new image for our relationship with God and with Jesus. Dee, we'll go back to you on this. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but how do you think women are perhaps more attuned to this life of the imagination? Certainly not that all men are all women, but there is something about maybe the feminine self that plays to this.
Well, I'm not certain that imagination is just the province of women, and you knew that when I've said before, because men also write books, and men tell stories when they speak, that kind of thing. But I know that personally, I struggled a little bit with imaginative prayer when I started, and I had to kind of let it loose, so to speak. And about the time we came to Christmas, at the Christmas story, I was considering the passage around the birth of Christ for my prayer time. And I began to think about Mary and Joseph in the stable. And then I thought, just a minute. I don't think Joseph would have been there to help her with the birth. I think that he went to get a midwife, because Jewish men had nothing to do with the actual birth of the child. So he would have been there to protect them or around there, but he would not have been there. And I could go further and imagine that stable and think about it. Other people think that it may have not smelled well, but I grew up knowing that on the farm, when there was a cow ready to give birth, they went into a clean area and new straw, and everything was clean, and I could smell the straw and I could come through that. And I think most people can. It's just that we have to kind of turn it loose. And yes, we tell stories to children. My grandchildren think I tell them a story every time I see them. And I hope I don't repeat them all, but they do think I'm always telling stories. But I think we have to let ourselves open up to the scripture and let it tell us the story and pray through that story and be grateful for what we find there. And that's part of what the imagination does, is it helps with our prayer time and developing that.
Yeah.
Does that help you along those lines?
Thank you.
Mary, do you want to say anything else about that, or?
Yeah, let me just quote from Anne Marie Pauline Campbell's research, where she asked the question to the women who made the 19th annotation retreat, what was the impact of the gospel what was the impact of gospel contemplation? And one of the responses reads as follows: for some women, the experience of imaginative contemplation enabled them to move deeper than the level of intellectual understanding to the level of personal experience and relationship. I used to believe that I had to read the Bible, and it was kind of like a works program. But this Ignatian way of praying with scripture touches something much deeper. You can have all the head knowledge and none of the heart knowledge. And now just taking a gospel story and living in it and connecting with him through it has changed me.
I think that is a perfect way to end this conversation. Thank you very much
Okay.
to both of you, to Dee Wiecher and to Mary White, for being with us today. Just wanted to say, we normally do these about once a month, but we're actually going to have an additional episode in just a couple of weeks on Friday, March 27th at 12:15. And that's the week before Holy Week. And so during that time, we're going to be talking to longtime Bridges prayer companion and site coordinator Carol Brescia about having an Ignatian approach specifically to Holy Week. So Bridges has been blessed with many incredible women over the years, and Carol has been one of those for many years. So we're looking forward to that conversation on March 27th. So yeah, thank you. I'll just put this up in case anybody is seeing this recording later. If you ever want more information about Bridges and everything that we've been talking about, you can visit our website at bridgesfoundation.org. All right. Thank you. And thanks for those who are watching now and those who might watch in the future. And thank you to Dee and Mary. If you guys will hold on, I'll just, we'll close off together, but I'll end our call now and say to you all, we'll see you on March 27th.
Thank you.
Thank you.